Hey, this is Jeff from MidStreet back with another video in the Small Business Valuation Essentials training course. Today we're going to talk about finding and selecting the right comparable sales to use in a small business valuation. So jumping right in the process of doing a valuation, this is where we're at. So we've done the preliminary recast. We've come up with what we think the SDE or the EBITDA is. Then we did a weighted average of a couple years to arrive at a number, and that's the number we're going to use when looking through the comparable sales databases. So the general process goes something like this. When you're looking to find comparables, you're going to use an online database to find similar business sales. Then you're going to look at those sales and get an idea for what the market is for the type of business that you're looking to value. Then you're going to compute the average of those comps as a starting point. And then you're going to adjust that average up and down to come up with a range that applies to the business you're trying to value. So, where can we find this private business sale data? Well, there's 5 databases I've listed here, and there are more, but these are the most common ones. Peer Comps is the one we'll use in this video. It's mostly SBA 7(a) deals, so between 100,000 up to 6 million in purchase price. Deal Stats used to be known as Pratt Stats before it was bought by BVR. It's a great database for bigger deals. It's a little bit more expensive, but it does have a lot of detail. And then BizMiner and BizComps are MidStreet deals less than $1 million. BizBuySell business valuation reports are also available. They're cheaper. I haven't used one before, but it seems like they would have some unique market data, so there might be something to look into there. All right, so when we're looking for comparable sales, there's very little data available, and that'll become clear as we work through some of the examples I have. The most important criteria, though, when you're looking through the databases are the size of the business, the industry, and the geography. So size-wise, if a business does 1 million in EBITDA, then a good range might be 800,000 to 1.2 million. For industry, you're going to want to pick industries that are very similar, but the most important thing with industry is business model, not necessarily the exact specifics of the work they do. So a company that does landscaping versus landscape install is pretty dissimilar, and a landscape install company is probably more similar to a construction business than it is to a lawn care business. So we'll touch on that a little bit more, but that's very important to keep in mind. Then geography. Geography is very important in business sales. It's not so important for valuation, though. Any state that you choose, and most databases only get as granular as the state, is going to largely be the same value-wise, because all states are going to include rural areas and urban areas. And so when you're looking at geography, it's good to start with a narrow geography, but we'll talk about why that might not be where you end up. So here, what if I do that search and I start with those narrow terms discussed and I don't come up with a lot of comparables? Well, then you're going to follow this process. So the first thing is broaden geography. These go in the opposite order as on the last slide because they're in the opposite order of importance. So you're going to start by expanding the geography of the search, and maybe you have to cover the whole country to find a suitable number of comps. Then you're going to broaden the industry, not necessarily all the way to the extent of going to other industries, but I would start with saying, are there any more terms I can add? Are there any other searches I can do to find more businesses that are similar? And then lastly, you might want to start looking for businesses that are vastly larger or smaller. This might be if you're looking for something like, say, for instance, a business that does pressure testing for pipes in an industrial setting. Probably aren't a lot of those businesses on BizMiner or Peer Comps or BVR. So if you're looking for that, you're going to have to start to look in a pretty big size range. Maybe it's anything from 250,000 to $1 million in SDE. That's a pretty big range, but what you're going to do is you're going to broaden that search term to get the comps, and then you can look at them and start to adjust your multiples based on the specifics of the comps that you looked at. So if they're all bigger, then you can pull it back a little bit. And so that's what that note there in the yellow is. If you use any of these techniques to broaden the search, you're going to have to adjust the multiples a little bit to account for that. And this is usually necessary. So if you want more information on this part of the process and expanding your search, we're going to talk about it when we hop in Peer Comps in a minute. But there's also a great blog on the MidStreet website. If you just search MidStreet comparable sales blog in Google, it should pop up. So when looking in Peer Comps, this is the data that you're typically going to see: the sale price of the business, the revenue, the earnings, the margins, the multiples, and then some information on the sale. So the year that it happened, and then the state that it was in, and the amount of money that was allocated towards the FF&E, and that's just the equipment that the business has. So, trucks, furniture, tools, that type of stuff. So this is all the data that you'll get from peer comps. So what are we going to do with this data? Well, we're going to put it into a table like this, and we're going to start to get a feel for what range do these types of businesses sell for. So we can see down here that the highest business in this set of data, and now this is like tour companies and travel companies. This was just something I pulled from a valuation we did. The highest multiple was 3.92. The lowest was 2.71. So that kind of gives you some big picture. What do these types of businesses sell for? And then you can start to get in here and look kind of granularly at the data. But in our valuations, and me personally, I find that looking at the data this way can be a little bit difficult. It's nice to go down and just say, are any of these in the 1 times or 2 times range? So 2, 2.9, 2.7. Those are probably good comps, but that will just give you an idea, is anything vastly high or low? But I actually prefer to look at this information in a scatter plot like this. So this shows you, as the size of the business goes up in earnings, what happens to the multiple. And what you'll typically see is that trend go up and to the right. As the business gets larger, the multiples tend to get larger too. And what it looks like in this data set is this number here seems to be a little bit of an outlier, right? A business this size selling for sub 3, but specifically, this 2.8, 2.7 times multiple seems a little bit low. So what we can do is hop back here, and we know that it's this business, it's the largest one. It was a travel agency. This gets into the discussion on industry. A travel agency is a little bit different than a tour operator, which is what I know our business is. So it's more similar to things like this boat tours, or tour operators, or snowmobile tours. So these are all more applicable comps than this travel agency. So what I would say is exclude this comp, and you can start to see that trend. So in orange here is our target business, SDE of around 1.4 million, and the multiple high end, we always just put the high end on here, is around 4 times. And so where did we get that range from? Well, we translated that from that data by picking what I like to call the baseline, or what we have in our model is the baseline. So in some instances, that'll just be a straight average. In some instances, we'll have to adjust the average if the comps are largely smaller or bigger or in a different industry or geography. So in this case, if you look here, the average was 3.36 of this set of data. Well, our business is by far the largest, excluding this outlier, in this set of data. So we know that it's going to be a little bit, the data is going to reflect a little bit low. So for this here, we took 3.36 as the average and increased it to a baseline of 3.6. Then we're going to take that baseline and adjust the range up and down on each side of that. A lot of the time, what I like to use is the standard deviation of the data, because it gives you a good idea of what the spread is. Plus or minus 1 standard deviation is typically where we start out. So you can see here, the standard deviation of the data is 0.42. So going -1 standard deviation and then +1 standard deviation, you end up with a range between 4 and 3.2. So then when you come back here, you can see that this is that high multiple. And you can see that when you apply that multiple of 3.23 times to the weighted average SDE of 1.4 million, you end up with a 4.5 times value on the low end and a 5.6 value on the high end. So this starts to develop that range. This was just an example taken from a valuation that I did to give you some color as to how the comps work. Now, what we'll do is we'll hop into peer comps, take a look at the database, and just show you an example of how I would go through and pull comps for a business. So, all right. So popping into peer comps here, this is one of the databases that we use at MidStreet, and I like it a lot because it's very simple and the comps seem to be accurate. So what I would do is, one option is I want to look for a landscaping business. So I would put in some terms that are going to give me businesses in any one of these three terms. So any word is what we'll click, and then we've got to sign back in here. All right. Landscape, landscaping, and lawn. So this got us 306 comparables. Now, you can start to do analysis on large numbers of comps like that, but that tends to not give, you could put that onto a scatter plot and get a lot of information, but I would prefer to get a little bit more granular before doing any analysis. So a second option here, instead of putting the terms in, is to use a system here that's called the NAICS code, which is an industry classification code. So you can search on Google or using the government website to find out what the NAICS is for the business that you're looking at. So for this landscaping service industry, it would be 561730. So we can get in here and go 56, scroll down to 17, and see 1730. So there's 245 businesses that fall within this specific NAICS. But we'll just stick with the way that we searched for it before. So we have 306. So now we can lower this to look at a range of 800,000 to 1 million in SDE. So now we're down to 8. We could get a little bit more specific on the geography, but I don't want to do that because we only have 8, and 8 is just not enough. We'd like to have 10. I would say having like 15 to start with is good, because then you can start to cull it down and pull out the outliers. So what I'll do is increase this range a little bit from 700,000 to 1.1 million. And now we have 15. So we can take this to the next step and take a look at what's available here. So I don't have a specific business in mind for this, and I didn't make an example, but I'll just go through here and remove some of these, assuming that we read them and they don't make sense. So our business is not a franchise, so this U.S. Lawns franchise might not be as applicable as some of the others. A nursery store or a garden store is not going to be that comparable, nor is an architectural service or a tree service. So now we have 11. We can take a look at the data and eliminate, maybe based off of the date of the comp. So this outlier of date is probably a good one to pick. So pull that off. Now we have 10. Okay, so we'll hit export to Excel, then open this up. For our Excel sheet as a company, we have to remove the row and double check here, the NAICS and the bank. Then we take this comp information and import this into our Excel sheet here. So for MidStreet, we eliminate a couple rows of the data and then import it into this valuation sheet here. Now this will show you the scatter plot being generated that we looked at on the last slide. So you can see between 700,000 and 1.1 million, these are roughly where the comps are. Now this is not accurate because this is just an example. But in this case, you can start to see where that spread is, and you can see that there's a slight positive correlation to the data. What we would do from here is make sure that all the comps are a reasonable time period. It actually looks like one slipped through here. That's 2005. So I would go back in and probably look for a different one to replace that if there were more available. But I'll look at some of the data here so you can see how does it distribute around the mean in terms of the SDE. So are there more that are towards the high end, more towards the low end of the range, and get a feel for where the comps show up or where the comps, what they reflect. So moving this over a little bit so you can read it. The average is about 3 times for all of these. And then we can see that the standard deviation is a little bit lower. They're a little bit tighter in range. And then we can see that the highest is 3.57 and the lowest is 2.45. So using that information, what we would then do to pick the multiple that we're going to prescribe to our subject business is move over to the value tab, and we're going to come in here and say, what do we feel an adequate baseline is? So for this business, we know that it is in the same industry of roughly similar size to the comps. And we know that this was a national geography. So we know that our business is pretty similar to the comp. So in my opinion, I would feel pretty comfortable using the average as the baseline. So I'll just set this equal to the average, and then I feel like the plus or minus one standard deviation that would be typical for our valuations is appropriate here. So what we're looking at is a range of 2.65 to 3.3 times. And that's a pretty big range, giving you a value from 3.75 million to 4.6 million. And so that gives you an overview of how we would pull the comps out of peer comps and input them into our sheet. You might have a different way of looking at it, but in general, that gives you a good idea of how to pull comps for a business sale and some of the basic analysis that I would do looking at them. Obviously, the goal is to get the comps to be as accurate as possible. There are situations where you'll have to adjust the comps pretty significantly up and down. For this example, I kept it pretty simple, but in a future video in the series, we'll go over some of the more extensive adjustments you need to do if the business that you're trying to value is in a niche industry, or if there just aren't that many comps out there for that particular business. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll go over another facet of small business valuation. I'm going to go through the timeline here after this video and pick what I think would be the next thing. So look forward to seeing you watch that video, and if you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. So, thanks.